Hey y'all, welcome back to Hands On Books. Another departure from our regular show where I open used books at random from a big pile. I've got a bag here of books that my family brought me from a recent trip to Santa Fe. They visited my favorite bookstore called Op-Sit and brought me back a bag of books. So I just wanted to open them on camera and see what we got. I picked out a few of them from pictures they sent me at bookshelves, but Op-Sit is a great store. It's just got towering, leaning towers of books all over the place, and it smells amazing. So the first book, The Normans, A History of Conquest by Trevor Rowley. Awesome. I did not pick this one, so someone knows my tastes. So I think I'm just going to read the backs and maybe the first page of these books and move on to the next one. The Normans' conquest of the known world was a phenomenon unlike anything Europe had witnessed previously. They emerged early in the 10th century but disappeared from world affairs by the mid-13th century. Yet in that time they had conquered England, Ireland, much of Wales, and parts of Scotland. They also founded a new Mediterranean kingdom in southern Italy and Sicily, as well as a crusader state in the Holy Land and in North Africa. Moreover, they had an extraordinary ability to adapt as time and place dictated, taking on the role of Norse invaders to Frankish crusaders, from Byzantine overlords to feudal monarchs. Drawing on archaeological and historical evidence, Trevor Rowley offers a comprehensive picture of the Normans and argues that despite the short time span of Norman ascendancy, it is clear that they were responsible for a permanent cultural and political legacy. In an author bio, Trevor Rowley has combined his career and education with a lifelong love of landscape history and archaeology. His prior works include Villages in the Landscape, The High Middle Ages, and Norman England. The Normans is his first book to be published in America. All right. Let's check it out. I think I'll read the first page of the introduction and the first page of chapter 1. In the English-speaking world, the Normans are almost always thought of in the context of William the Conqueror and his defeat of Harold of England at the Battle of Hastings in 1066. The process by which Normandy came into being and the activities of Normans in other parts of Europe, notably southern Italy and the Levant, are little known except by Norman enthusiasts and specialist scholars. It is the aim of this book to bring the story of the Norman achievement to the general reader, considering not only the Normans in Normandy and England, but also Norman activities in the Mediterranean, and to assess the overall place of the Normans in medieval history and their impact in its entirety. The Norman story at first seems deceptively straightforward. The area which was to become known as Normandy was ceded to the Vikings by the Western Carolingian Empire in the early 10th century and then went on to become the most powerful principality in northern France. The energy, ruthlessness, and administrative ability of the Normans enabled them to subdue and, in most cases, annex the lands of their Frankish neighbors, and also to mount a military campaign that enabled them to defeat a formidable, united Anglo-Saxon kingdom in England. And a map on the third page is what I like to see. All right, let me check out the first page of the first chapter. Vikings, Norsemen, and Normans. The Duchy of Normandy emerged in the 10th century out of the region known in the post-Roman era as the Breton or Neustrian March, an area which occupied the western edge of the decaying Frankish or Carolingian Empire. Neustria meant New Westland, in contrast to Austrasia, Eastland. It was the inhabitants of Neustria who first used the term Francia for the western kingdom of the Carolingian Empire. Frank was derived from the old Germanic word for members of the tribe on the Rhine, which conquered much of the country that became France. According to the rather scanty surviving historical records, the legal origins of Normandy date from 911, when a Scandinavian warlord called Rollo, or Rolfer, was created Count of Rouen and granted the lower Seine valley by Charles the Simple. king of the Western Franks. Before this, there had been Viking activity in northwestern France for at least the previous half-century, during which time towns, villages, and monasteries were plundered in just the same way as eastern and central England was being regularly attacked on the other side of the English Channel. Looks like a cool book. I love this period of French history. The Bayeux Tapestry. Cool pictures. All right, let's see what else we got. Himalaya, A Human History by Ed Douglas. Hailed as hugely ambitious and far-reaching, Ed Douglas's Himalaya redefines our understanding of this pivotal region, spanning millennia from the earliest inhabitants to the present conflicts over Tibet and Everest. Himalaya explores the history, cultures, climate, geography, and politics of this vast and unique place, and pays vivid attention to the peoples who call it home. In this landmark work, Douglas shows us that far from being wild and barren, the Himalaya has been home to a diversity of indigenous and local cultures, a crucible of world religions, a crossroads for trade, and a meeting point and conflict zone for empires past and present. He profiles the great kings of Kathmandu in Nepal, traces the flourishing evolution of Buddhism and Hinduism that brought Himalayan spirituality to the world, and depicts with great drama the story of how the East India Company grappled for dominance with China's emperors. This story makes a thrilling case for the Himalaya's importance in global history and offers a soaring account of life at the roof of the world. Ed Douglas is an award-winning writer with a passion for the Himalaya. The author of a dozen books, including a biography of Tenzing Norgay, he has reported from the region for more than 25 years, covering the Maoist insurgency in Nepal and the Tibetan occupation. He lives in Yorkshire, England. Chapter 1, Pilgrims. The earth asked Vishnu, "Why do you come in the form of mountains and not in your own form?" Vishnu replied, "The pleasure that exists in mountains is greater than that of animate beings, for they feel no heat, nor cold, nor pain, nor anger, nor fear, nor pleasure. We three gods as mountains will reside in the earth for the benefit of mankind." In the late summer of 1995, I flew to India for my first experience of climbing in the Himalaya. The monsoon was still strong, and in those days, a quarter of a century ago, parts of Delhi flooded more readily. Many lower-lying streets were submerged in brown water. It was still raining as we drove north in a bus, stopping for a night in Rishikesh on the banks of the swollen Ganges. The Beatles studied transcendental meditation here in 1968 with the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, turning on millions of young Westerners to Eastern spiritual practices. Quote, "After I had taken LSD," George Harrison recalled, "a lingering thought stayed with me, and the thought was, the yogis of the Himalayas. That was part of the reason I went to India. Ravi, Shankar, and the sitar were excuses, although they were a very, very important part of it. It was a search for a spiritual connection." End quote. It occurred to me only much later that I had been lifted into the mountains on the last gasp of the same cultural tide, upstairs in my suburban bedroom in the early 1980s, listening to old Bob Dylan records and reading stories of my climbing heroes high in the faraway, mythical Himalaya. Next day we reached the mountains, half submerged in a torrential downpour. The roads ran with water. Mist clung to rock faces that overhung the roof of the bus. Heavy cloud shrouded the peaks. A mile or so from the village of Gangotri, in what was then part of Uttar Pradesh, the bus stopped abruptly. Huge granite boulders had tumbled down from a cliff above, loosened by the rain. It would take explosives and bulldozers to clear the way. For now this was the end of the road. We peered up at the unstable slope, wondering about the next rockfall, anxious to get going and out of the way. A number of lean and eager men surrounded the bus, grinning wildly, dressed in thin cotton shorts and shirts and holding plastic sheeting around their shoulders, their only protection against the rain. A price was agreed and our gear continued into the village on their backs. We followed, sheltering under umbrellas. It was as though I'd found a door marked Adventure and stepped through it. It's a pretty great opening to this book. I like the writing. Next. Nuer Religion by Evans-Pritchard. Yeah, Opposite always has a great religion section. Always find something interesting there. The Nuer are now one of the best known Nilotic peoples, though till recently little had been written about their religious thought and practice. Evans-Pritchard laid the foundations for the present study in two earlier books, The Nuer, A Description of the Modes of Livelihood and Political Institutions of a Nilotic People, 1940, and Kinship and Marriage Among the Nuer, 1951. This book was written, however, not only to complete a general ethnographic account, but also as a self-contained study of a primitive religion. The author is able to discern the sense of the totality of the beliefs and practices he has so acutely observed and lucidly interpreted in a volume indispensable for social anthropologists, and of very great interest to Old Testament scholars and those engaged in the comparative study of religion. Evans-Pritchard was professor of social anthropology in the University of Oxford from 1946 until his retirement in 1970. Besides the books mentioned above, his publications include Witchcraft, Oracles, and Magic Among the Azande, 1937, The Senussi of Cyrenaica, 1949, Theories of Primitive Religion, 1965, and The Zande Trickster, 1967. The Nuer and Theories of Primitive Religion are available in paper covers as well as cloth bindings. Oxford University Press. Let's check it out. Chapter 1. God. The Nuer word we translate God is quoth, spirit. Nuer also speak of him more definitely as quoth niao or quoth an niao, spirit of the sky or spirit who is in the sky. There are other and lesser spirits which they class as kuth niao, spirits of the sky or of the above, and kuth pini, spirits of the earth or of the below. I discuss the conception of God first because the other spiritual conceptions are dependent on it and can only be understood in relation to it. The Nuer quoth, like the Latin spiritus, the Greek pneuma, and the English derivatives of both words, suggests both the intangible quality of air and the breathing or blowing out of air. Like the Hebrew ruach, it is an onomatopoeia and denotes violent breathing out of air in contrast to ordinary breathing. In its verbal form, it is used to describe such actions as blowing on the embers of a fire, blowing on food to cool it, blowing into the uterus of a cow, while a tolchan is propped up before it to make it give milk. Snorting, the blowing out of air by the pufffish, and the hooting by steam pressure of a river steamer. The word is also found, and has the same general sense, in some of the other Nilotic languages. As a noun, however, quoth means only spirit, and in the particular sense we are now discussing, it means quoth niao or quoth a niao, spirit of the heavens or spirit who is in the heavens, the copula a in the second designation being one of the verbs we translate to be. Nial is the sky, and combined with verbs, the word may also refer to certain natural processes associated with the sky, as raining and thundering. But it may also have merely the sense of on high or above. We may certainly say that the Nuer do not regard the sky or any celestial phenomenon as God, but this is clearly shown in the distinction made between God and the sky in the expressions spirit of the sky and spirit who is in the sky. Moreover, it would even be a mistake to interpret of the sky and in the sky too literally. Seems dense. I like to flip through for pictures and see what we have. Consecrating a goat. Invocation of some sort. Ooh. Gotta be more careful. And just probably crack the spine a little bit worse than it was already cracked, but oh well. Next. The Way of the Sufi by Idries Shah. Sufism has a large following in the West, not only as a study for Orientalists, but also as a practical path of spiritual development. In The Way of the Sufi, Idries Shah, currently at the head of the Sufi tradition, presents an unparalleled cross-section of material from Sufi schools, teachings, and classical writings as a basic course of Sufi study. The greater part of the book illuminates aspects of the secret of Sufi activity and the practice relevant to the world today. The author begins with the outward aspects of the teaching most likely to puzzle the student coming fresh to the subject. He deals with various attitudes to Sufi ideas and evidence of their absorption into medieval Christianity, Hinduism, Jewish mysticism, and modern philosophical systems like that of Gurdjieff. He goes on to examine more closely some startling Sufi claims, such as precognition by direct perception, and the anticipation of scientific and therapeutic conclusions long before they became generally accepted. The laborious clinical and experimental methods that characterize approaches to knowledge in our modern world are clearly shown to have little place in the Sufi way to understanding. Some fascinating notes on sources are given, together with a detailed bibliography. Some quotes here. To be a Sufi is to detach from fixed ideas and from preconceptions, and not to try to avoid what is your lot. Abu Sa'id, son of Abi Khair. Do not look at my outward shape, but take what is in my hand. Jalaluddin Rumi. All right. Introduction. The Sufi is one who does what others do, when it is necessary. He is also one who does what others cannot do, when it is indicated. Nuri Mojudi. So many people profess themselves bewildered by Sufi lore that one is forced to the conclusion that they want to be bewildered. Others, for more obvious reasons, simplify things to such an extent that their Sufism is just a cult of love or of meditations or of something equally selective. But a person with a portion of uncommitted interest who looks at the variety of Sufi action can see the common characteristics staring him in the face. The Sufi sages, schools, writers, teachings, humor, mysticism, formulations are all connected with the social and psychological relevance of certain human ideas. Being a man of timelessness and placelessness, the Sufi brings his experience into operation within the culture, the country, the climate in which he is living. The study of Sufic activity in distant cultures alone is of value only to those working in the narrow field of scholasticism. Considering Sufi activities as merely religious, literary, or philosophical phenomena will produce only garbled renditions of the Sufi way. To try to extract theory or system and to attempt the study of it in isolation is just as comparatively profitless. This book is designed to present Sufi ideas, actions, and report, not for the microscope or as museum pieces, but in their relevance to a current community, what we call the contemporary world. London, 1968. Oh no, highlighting. Oh well, I guess it's just the first page. No, it's not. Anyway, first page. The study of Sufism in the West. Theories about Sufism. Let us presume no background of Sufi ideas on the part of an imaginary student who has recently heard of Sufism. He has three possible choices of source material. The first would be reference books and works written by people who have made this subject their special province. The second might be organizations purporting to teach or practice Sufism, or using its terminology. The third could be individuals and perhaps groups of people, not always in Middle Eastern countries, who are reputedly Sufis. He may not yet have been induced to believe that Sufism is to be labeled Mohammedan mysticism, or the cult of the dervishes. What does this man learn, and what are his problems? One of the first things that he could discover is that the very word Sufism is a new one, a German coinage of 1821. No Sufi ignorant of Western languages would be likely to recognize it on sight. Instead of Sufism, our student would have to deal with terms such as the Idries, named after the founder of a certain rule who died in 1166. Or he might come across references to the people of truth, the masters, or perhaps the near ones. Another possibility is the Arabic phrase, mutasawwif, he who strives to be a Sufi. There are organizations called the Builders, the Blameworthy, which in constitution and sometimes even minor symbolism closely resemble Western cults and societies like Freemasonry. These names can ring oddly, and not always felicitously, in the contemporary Western ear. This fact alone is a real psychological problem, though a concealed one. As there is no standard appellation for Sufism, the inquirer may turn to the word Sufi itself, and discover that it suddenly became current about 1,000 years ago, both in the Near East and in Western Europe. And it is still in general use to describe particularly the best product of certain ideas and practices, by no means confined to what people would conventionally call religious. He will find plenty of definitions for the word, but his problem is now reversed. Instead of coming up against a mere label of no great age, he gets so many descriptions of Sufi that he might as well have none at all. Seems like a cool book. Disappointed on the highlighting. What do we got next? Autobiography of a Yogi. Paramahansa Yogananda. So originally I thought this guy was a acolyte of Ramakrishna, but that turned out to be a different guy named Swami Yogananda. So I have heard of this guy before, but I don't really know anything about him, except he's got like a very calming, almost angelic face. Paramahansa Yogananda was the first great master of India to live in the West for a long period, over 30 years. In this book, he explains with scientific clarity the subtle but definite laws of which yogis perform miracles and attain self-mastery. A graduate of Calcutta University, Yogananda writes with unforgettable sincerity and incisive wit. Autobiography of a Yogi has been translated into 12 languages. Oh, as of then. That's a cool owner stamp. Yogananda lived from 1893 to 1952. Dedicated to the memory of Luther Burbank, an American saint. Wonder who that is. Preface by W.Y. Evans-Wentz, someone with a bunch of degrees from Jesus College, Oxford, author of The Tibetan Book of the Dead, Tibet's Great Yogi Milarepa, Tibetan Yoga and Secret Doctrines, and more. The value of Yogananda's autobiography is greatly enhanced by the fact that it is one of the few books in English about the wise men of India which have been written not by a journalist or foreigner, but by one of their own race and training. In short, a book about yogis by a yogi. As an eyewitness recountal of the extraordinary lives and powers of modern Hindu saints, the book has importance both timely and timeless. To its illustrious author, who I have had the pleasure of knowing in both India and America, may every reader render due appreciation and gratitude. His unusual life document is certainly one of the most revealing of the depths of the Hindu mind and heart, and of the spiritual wealth of India, ever to be published in the West. It has been my privilege to meet one of the sages whose life history is herein narrated, Sri Yukteswar Giri. A likeness of the venerable saint appeared as part of the frontispiece of my Tibetan Yoga and Secret Doctrines. It was at Puri, in Orissa, on the Bay of Bengal, that I encountered Sri Yukteswar. He was then head of a quiet ashrama near the seashore there, and was chiefly occupied in the spiritual training of a group of youthful disciples. He expressed keen interest in the welfare of the people of the United States and of all the Americas, and of England too, and questioned me concerning the distant activities, particularly those in California, of his chief disciple, Paramahansa Yogananda, whom he dearly loved, and whom he had sent in 1920 as his emissary to the West. I like that first page. I'll just finish the preface since it's this short. Sri Yukteswar was of gentle mien and voice, of pleasing presence, and worthy of the veneration that his followers spontaneously accorded to him. Every person who knew him, whether of his own community or not, held him in the highest esteem. I vividly recall his tall, straight, ascetic figure, robed in the saffron-colored garb of one who has renounced worldly quests, as he stood at the entrance of the hermitage to give me welcome. His hair was long and somewhat curly, and his face bearded. His body was muscularly firm, but slender and well-formed, and his step energetic. He had chosen as his place of earthly abode the holy city of Puri, whither multitudes of pious Hindus, representative of every province of India, come daily on pilgrimage to the famed temple of Jagannath, Lord of the world. It was at Puri that Sri Yukteswar closed his mortal eyes, in 1936, to the scenes of this transitory state of being and passed on, knowing that his incarnation had been carried to a triumphant completion. I am glad, indeed, to be able to record this testimony to the high character and holiness of Sri Yukteswar. Content to remain afar from the multitude, he gave himself unreservedly and in tranquillity to that ideal life which Paramahansa Yogananda, his disciple, has now described for the ages. Map of India prior to 1947. Chapter 1. My Parents and Early Life. The characteristic features of Indian culture have long been a search for ultimate verities and the concomitant disciple-guru relationship. My own path led to a Christ-like sage. His beautiful life was chiseled for the ages. He was one of the great masters who are India's truest wealth. Emerging in every generation, they have bulwarked their land against the fate of ancient Egypt and Babylonia. I find my earliest memories covering the anachronistic features of a previous incarnation. Clear recollections came to me of a distant life in which I had been a yogi amid the Himalayan snows. These glimpses of the past, by some dimensionless link, also afforded me a glimpse of the future. I still remember the helpless humiliations of infancy. I was resentfully conscious of being unable to walk and to express myself freely. Prayerful surges arose within me as I realized my bodily impotence. My strong emotional life was mentally expressed in words of many languages. Amid the inward confusion of tongues, I gradually became accustomed to hearing the Bengali syllables of my people. The beguiling scope of an infant's mind, adultly considered to be limited to toys and toes. Psychological ferment in my unresponsive body brought me to many obstinate crying spells. I recall the general family bewilderment at my distress. Happier memories, too, crowd in on me. My mother's caresses, and my first attempts at lisping phrase and toddling step. These early triumphs, usually forgotten quickly, are yet a natural basis of self-confidence. Interesting. I don't know. Looks like this is the last one. Hindus, Their Religious Beliefs and Practices by Julius Lipner. Usually these Routledge books are pretty expensive, but I think this one was just $10, so I decided to scoop it. Julius Lipner was born and raised in India, where he experienced and learned about Hinduism firsthand. He lectures in religious studies in the Faculty of Divinity at the University of Cambridge and is the author of a number of books, including The Face of Truth, a study of meaning and metaphysics in the Vedantic theology of Ramanuja, and Hindu Ethics, Purity, Abortion, and Euthanasia, co-authored with H. Coward and K. Young. This book is dedicated to the memory of my brother-in-law, Pradeep Kumar Yogi, 1950-93, who will be sadly missed. And a poem here. Life is the roll of a wave. Youth's beauty endures but a day. Wealth takes fancy's form, and pleasure's flow is like a monsoon's lightning flash. Even love's embrace by loved ones offered does not last. So fix your minds on Brahman, to reach life's dreadful ocean's further shore. From the fine sayings of Bhartrhari. Always hard when there's 4 consonants smashed together. About Hinduism, and this book. Here we go again, yet another book on Hinduism. In an apparently saturated market, is there room for more? The answer must be, surely yes. Not necessarily for this particular one, of course, but in theory for an endless stream of books. Hinduism, or the plural reality labeled as such, has been a major cultural phenomenon for well over 3,000 years. It has regularly produced men and women down the ages who have made outstanding contributions across the range of the civilized human endeavor that we have come to appreciate in our increasingly cross-cultural world, in religion and philosophy, in the sciences and the fine arts, in physical, technical, and literary skills. Outstanding Hindus apart, Hinduism has sustained and oriented every aspect of the lives of countless ordinary people. It has played a crucial part in the rise of at least 2 other great religions, Buddhism and Sikhism, and in the development of 2 more, Christianity and Islam, during the many centuries that these 2 faiths have been present in the Indian subcontinent. All this is reason enough to continue the study of Hinduism indefinitely. But Hinduism remains a major world force today, its contemporary global influence apparently greater than ever. This century, in one way or another, India has occupied a prominent place in the public eye, as the jewel in the crown of the widespread British Empire, in the march to independence with Mahatma Gandhi so poignantly in the lead, as the scene of some of the most horrific religious and political strife ever recorded, as the theater for more than one internecine war, as the stage for literary and artistic genius of the caliber of R.K. Narayan, Rabindranath Tagore, Satyajit Ray, and Ravi Shankar, as the home of yoga and age-old religious and philosophical wisdom, as exporter to the West of assorted gurus and godmen, as the appropriate context for the work of a Mother Teresa, as a developing country fast acquiring scientific and technological expertise. India has its own space and nuclear capability. Economically poor yet justly proud of its rich cultural heritage. And the dominant and dominating context of this kaleidoscopic image has been Hinduism. Hindus comprise about 80% of the subcontinent's population, or over 600 million people. in 94. Some pencil marks in here. I thought that was the intro, but apparently that was chapter 1. But I want to read a little bit more. Chapter 2. The Voice of Scripture as Veda. Let us begin our understanding of religious Hinduism by considering the question of the guiding voices to which the Hindu ear has traditionally been attentive. We can conveniently divide this topic into 3 headings: the voice of Scripture, the voice of tradition, and the voice of experience. In this and the next chapter, we shall inquire into the voice of canonical Scripture. Scripture is perhaps a misleading word. It comes from scribere in Latin, which means to write. The equivalent Sanskrit term which we have in mind for Scripture in general is shabda, which comes from shabd, to make a sound, to call. For Hindus, the Scripture in its most authoritative form is what has been heard and transmitted orally, not what has been written. No doubt in India, down the centuries, Scripture has been written down for incidental purposes, but as such it loses vitality. The sacred word springs to life and exerts power when it is spoken and heard. Love that line. This is why we can quite appropriately speak of the voice of Scripture in the context of Hinduism. In the history of Christendom, the dominant medium of communicating truth and value has arguably been the written word. The elders of the community have exercised authority by referring to what has been decisively written, either in Scripture or in numerous councils or official promulgations of some kind. In this sense, Hinduism is not a religion of the book. In Hinduism, the dominant medium of communicating authoritatively has been by word of mouth, the dominant source, that which has been heard. This is not to say that the medium of seeing has not been important. It has, but in different ways, as we shall appreciate in the course of this book. Traditionally, seeing has not been enough. I like that. Decent amount of marking up, but oh well. At least it's not highlighter. All right, that's going to do it for the show. If you've made it this far, I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed it and might have gotten some ideas of what you want to read next or topics you might want to pursue further. Next time, hopefully we'll be back to our regular format, but until then, happy reading.